Today we're going to be talking about the clinical trial authorization in the EU. This is actually one of my favorite things to talk about because I like to travel. So anything that gets me like overseas, even if I'm sitting in my office and learning about something, makes me happy. So today we're going to talk about how we navigate Europe's regulations, directives, and guidelines. There are some similarities to the U.S. and some differences. We're going to talk about the basic requirements of the clinical trials authorization. Also the IND, which is, there's an equivalence in the EU to the IMPD, so we're going to talk about that. The IMPD is part of the CTA. We're going to identify key documents that are going to be needed for preparation of each country's CTA, specific documents that are required, and we're also going to talk about timelines for review by different ministries of health and ethics committees, and also what you need to amend and maintain the CTA along the process. And there are certain things that are very different to what you're used to seeing in the U.S., so we're going to point those things out. So the agenda is just very simple. We're going to go over the brief background. We're going to talk about a little bit about the format of the CTD, which is very important, not only here in the U.S., but very much in Europe. There'll be a bit of discussion about some terms, good practices, UDRACT. Then we're going to get into the CTA and the IMPD. The IMPD, if you remember, is the IND sort of portion. Some other required documents, timeframes, amendments, scientific advice, and importing drug. So this is a map of the EU. There are currently 28 member states in the EU. I just like this map. I think it's kind of interesting to see. And the EU was formally started in 1951 with the Treaty of Paris. And it was based on certain criteria called the Copenhagen criteria, where basically it's open to any European country that's a stable free market and a liberal democracy that respects the rule of law and human rights. They have to be willing to accept all the obligations of membership, such as adopting all previously agreed laws and switching to the euro. Now, we all, I'm sure, are familiar with Brexit and that whole change, and that's in the process of being sorted out. They're still considered part of the EU right now, but that's all being worked out financially. I'm not exactly sure when the cutoff is. It represents greater than 800 million people. They have a single common market with free movement of goods, people, currency, and services. It makes it really easy. I just got back actually from Italy and Spain, and the one thing that was great was I didn't have to carry a bunch of different types of currency. I mean, both countries are in the EU, so they're all euros. So it really makes it a lot easier to travel as a tourist for those of you that are here in the U.S. There are three key bodies: the European Commission, the Council of the European Union, and the European Parliament. So currently there are 28 member states, and see that there's a lot of different colors and bolding and some italics here as well. So the reason being is they all have different sort of investment, okay? The ones that are seriously invested are the ones that are in bold, and they were some of the original members of the EU. The ones that are in italics, they have a less, let's say, good relationship with the EU, and as we know, the United Kingdom is on its way out due to Brexit. So in the UK, for instance, you still use pound sterling, even though the euro was the traditional monetary unit of the EU. Okay, there are 21 official EU languages. This is important for labeling. It's one of the reasons I discuss this, because depending on the kind of study that you're doing and what country you're in, your labeling may need to be in the native language. That may need to be first. If you have a global study that's going on in more than one country, that can create some labeling issues with your clinical supplies department. So it's very important to understand that even though it's what's considered a global study, there's not one global or official EU language. Each country still maintains their language, although most people do speak English, not necessarily those people that are in clinical trials. So it's really important to make sure that you have sort of a knowledge of when you're doing these projects, all the different things that are affected by it. So EU enlargement, Croatia was the last to come in 2013. There are priority membership, though, for a number of other countries, and many are still applying. There are no real plans to cease. The EU is planning to get as large as it wants, as it can. The other part of Europe that we want to talk about is the European Economic Area. It's a single market that provides for free movement throughout the EU, and there are member states also called the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. So it's sort of connected to the EU, but it's not necessarily part of the EU. And that's really sort of the big thing to know about that. It's the most important thing to know.